So we actually had a listener share this really powerful story recently. Yeah, about seeing, these relics, supposedly the Buddha's hair and a walking stick.
Wow. Okay.
And it was just one of those moments, where this historical figure just suddenly feels incredibly real.
Absolutely. Like a real person.
Exactly, a person like us. And it got me thinking, how do we really get our heads around his journey, the path to awakening, the core stuff, without getting totally bogged down?
Right. It can seem overwhelming.
Yeah. So for everyone listening who, wants to be properly informed, but maybe doesn't have time for endless reading, we've done a deep dive, looked at the early sources, the context, to pull out the key insights. Really, the mission here is to understand what drove him, what was behind his path, and maybe what we can take from it today.
And that feeling the listener had, that connection, seeing the Buddha as a human, that's actually, I think, crucial for understanding his motivation. Well, the texts show even before he was fully awakened, he was already deeply involved in faring rightly, meditating, and reflecting.
Yep.
It wasn't just meditation or reflection, it was both.
Right.
This careful thinking combined with the practice, that's what seemed to fuel his progress. Makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we really reflect like that?
That's a really good point. We often just react. And the image we get of the Buddha after awakening is pretty striking too, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Like unperturbed purity, this constant, compassionate smile, no anger, happy in solitude, just totally focused on the essentials.
Yeah.
It's almost like seeing the finished product and then trying to reverse engineer the journey. So what were those early challenges, the real human stuff that set him off?
Well, if we try and connect it to our own lives, the texts talk about this profound self-examination he did.
Okay.
He spent time really considering, the big universals: sickness, getting old, death.
The inescapable things.
Yeah, exactly. And he didn't just think about them abstractly. He saw his own vulnerability. He realized he was subject to all of it.
Right.
And that wasn't just like an intellectual thing. It fundamentally shifted his perspective. He thought, well, if I'm going to get sick and old, how can I possibly feel disgusted or superior when I see someone else going through it?
Wow. That's a powerful way to look at it. Seeing the shared condition.
Totally. It's about recognizing we're all in the same boat.
Instead of turning away, he looked right at it. And the texts, they contrast this with what they call the uninstructed, ignorant worldlings.
Right. Those who react negatively, see someone sick or old and feel revulsion or judgment. But they don't turn that gaze inward. They don't see that same future for themselves.
And that stops them from letting go of illusions, like perfect health forever.
Exactly. That lack of self-awareness, the sources say, keeps them trapped, blind to how things really are, always changing.
And it seems like, even though one source might be missing a specific bit about death, the whole theme is so strong across the board, right? With old age and sickness discussed elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's clearly implied. Reflecting on mortality was definitely a huge part of his early thinking.
It makes you think about our own attitudes when things are going well.
Yeah, and the texts actually warn about that. There's a danger, it suggests, when we feel healthy and secure.
Now so?
It can lead to pride, maybe a kind of negligence, carelessness. You feel good, so you don't look deeper.
Right, distraction.
Yeah, and that pride, often tied up with our desires, actually blocks the path. It gets in the way of cultivating a meaningful life, asking the bigger questions.
Okay, so he confronted these big human vulnerabilities head on. What was the next step? What kind of foundation did he build before diving into those really intense practices?
The sources are really clear on this.
Yeah.
Ethics. A strong ethical foundation was non-negotiable.
Got it.
The Bhayaprabha Sutta, for example, really emphasizes purity in body, speech, mind, even how you make a living. And this wasn't just about like ticking boxes or following rules. It was about creating a stable, clear inner space, kind of like weeding the garden before you plant the seeds for meditation.
That makes perfect sense. Clearing the ground. And part of this was offering fearlessness. What's that about?
It's basically about actively choosing not to do things that cause harm or fear in others. So, not killing, not stealing, the basics.
Okay.
But there's a really neat feedback loop. By giving that sense of safety to others, you cultivate it within yourself.
Ah, I see.
So when you face your own difficulties later, like getting sick or even facing death, you don't have that extra weight of regret from harming others. It smooths the path internally.
Living ethically helps ease the conscience, yeah. Now, you mentioned seclusion. The texts say ancient India, nature could be pretty dangerous.
Oh, definitely. It wasn't always some peaceful retreat. Seeking solitude back then meant facing real risks.
Like what?
Wild animals were a genuine threat, getting sick with nobody around to help, even, robbers or criminals hiding out.
So it wasn't a romantic getaway.
Not at all. It was a potentially hazardous part of the quest.
So establishing that ethical base, it wasn't just about inner clarity, but also about preparing himself to face those external dangers.
I think so, yeah. It addressed the internal sources of fear, guilt, regret. And that probably freed up mental energy to deal with the external threats with more presence.
And the Bhayabhairava Sutta describes a specific practice for dealing with fear, right?
Yes, it's quite remarkable. If fear arose, say, he heard a sudden noise in the forest, his practice was not to jump up or run or investigate.
What did he do?
He'd remain in whatever posture he was in, sitting, standing, walking, until the feeling of fear just naturally subsided.
Wow. Just stay with it.
Exactly. Meeting the fear with stillness and awareness, rather than reacting to the story the mind creates about the fear.
That's so counterintuitive to how most of us react. We want to get away or figure it out immediately.
Precisely. Our instinct is change posture, distract ourselves, do something. He cultivated this ability to just be with the fear, watch it arise and pass in the body and mind without getting swept away, staying anchored in the present.
That idea of observing without immediate reaction feels fundamental. Okay, so as he went deeper, what other mental stuff did he run into? What obstacles came up and how did he learn to handle them?
Well, again, the first step, according to the text, was just recognizing them, spotting the obstructions.
Okay.
The Dviravitaka Sutta talks about this. Even before awakening, he made a habit of dividing his thoughts, wholesome or unwholesome.
Like sorting them.
Kind of. Thoughts driven by sensuality, ill will, wanting to harm, versus thoughts of letting go, kindness, compassion.
And he saw the difference.
Clearly, he recognized that the unwholesome ones, they harm you, they harm others, they cloud your wisdom, they definitely don't lead to liberation, to nirvana. It's about becoming aware of your own inner commentary.
It's actually quite reassuring, isn't it? Knowing that even the person who became the Buddha had to deal with negative thoughts.
Absolutely. It makes the whole path feel more achievable, more human, not some superpower.
Yeah.
So once he saw how damaging they were, he consciously worked to abandon them, let them go. It's this active process. Identify, see the harm, release.
Okay.
He used this really great simile. Wet wood. You pull a piece of wood out of water, it's soaking wet.
Yeah.
No matter how hard you try, it's not going to catch fire easily, right?
Right. Too damp.
That's like the mind soaked in sensual desire. Even if you stop the external actions, the internal obsession, the wetness, it lingers. It's hard to ignite insight.
So you need dry wood.
Exactly. A mind that's at least temporarily free from that obsessive pull, that's the dry wood, that can actually catch the spark of awakening.
That's a powerful image. So it wasn't just about stopping the negative, he also actively encouraged the positive.
Precisely. Those wholesome thoughts, free from greed, hate, harm, he saw they weren't harmful. They actually helped develop wisdom, and they did lead towards nirvana. So he deliberately cultivated them, nurtured them. And the texts point out, your mind tends to delight in whatever you keep bringing it back to, what you intend, what you think about a lot.
So we have power there.
Huge power. By choosing where to place our attention, choosing wholesome thoughts, abandoning the unwholesome.
Okay. Now, the term nimitta pops up around here related to concentration. What's a nimitta? Is it important?
Yeah, nimitta. In the context of early concentration practice, it seems to mean a kind of mental sign, or maybe an image that appears when the mind gets quiet.
A sign.
Yeah, something that helps you stabilize your focus, like a mental anchor point you can gently rest your awareness on. People debate exactly what it is, but the general idea is it helps build tranquility and deepen the concentration. It's a kind of stepping stone.
Okay, a helpful focus aid.
Yeah.
So after dealing with the big ones like desire and aversion, what other, maybe more subtle mental hurdles did he find as he tried to go even deeper into concentration?
The Upakalesa Sutta gives a list, actually. More refined mental blemishes or defilements that still got in the way of the really deep states, the absorptions. And he systematically recognized and overcame those too. And through that, he reached these 3 key levels of concentration, or shanas.
Right.
The first still has some, initial directing of the mind and sustained attention. The second lets go of the initial directing but keeps the sustaining. And the third goes beyond both.
And the texts say he knew what was happening. He wasn't just spaced out, he maintained clarity through these states.
Exactly. He was certain that his knowledge and vision weren't being lost as he transitioned. The Madhyamagama actually gives even more detail on the different ways to practice associated with these levels.
Okay.
And just quickly, those terms vitakka and vikara often translated like thought and reflection. In this jhana context, it's probably better to think of them as application or directing the mind and then sustaining the attention.
So vitakka isn't just random thinking here.
No, not conceptual thought. It's the initial placement of the mind onto the meditation object.
Got it. So refining concentration meant tackling increasingly subtle stuff. Now, his big goal was always nirvana, that supreme peace. After these initial meditative successes, where did he turn next?
Well, the texts really stress his deep yearning for nirvana, a state totally free from sickness, aging, death, worry, sadness, all of it.
The ultimate freedom.
Right. So his first move after his own early deep meditations was to seek out teachers. He went to two very famous ones at the time, Ella Kalama and then Udaka Ramaputta.
Okay.
With Ara Kalama, he mastered this state called the sphere of nothingness, incredibly deep, but he realized it wasn't the end goal.
Why not?
Because even reaching that state just led to being reborn in that same state. It wasn't permanent liberation from the whole cycle. A high, yes, but a temporary one.
And Āgamas saw how skilled he was.
Right.
Offered to let him teach alongside him.
Yes, exactly. A huge acknowledgement. Then, pretty much the same thing happened with Udaka Ramaputta.
He mastered his teaching, too.
Yeah, attained the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Even went beyond Udaka, it seems.
And Udaka's reaction?
Well, the accounts differ slightly. One text, the Aryapariyasana Sutta, says Udaka invited him to take over completely, be the sole teacher.
Wow.
Others suggest Udaka offered to share the leadership, like Ara did.
The first version might make more sense if he'd actually surpassed the teacher.
Perhaps, yeah. But the key point, really, is that even reaching these absolute pinnacles of formless meditation, it wasn't enough for him.
Still not the full liberation he saw.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wasn't satisfied. He saw these were still conditioned states, still temporary, didn't pull out the roots of suffering. And that deep dissatisfaction, that's what pushed him towards the next phase. Extreme asceticism.
Ah, the really harsh practices.
Right. But it's so important to remember the thread running through all of this. That unwavering quest for freedom from old age, sickness, and death. That was the constant driver.
So exploring these deep meditations wasn't enough. He then dives into these really intense ascetic practices. What kind of things did that involve?
The main ones described for this final push seem to be forceful mind control, really intense breath control, and extreme fasting.
Okay.
Now, there's one text, the Mahasihanada Sutta, that lists a whole bunch of ascetic stuff, ritual bathing, and letting dirt build up, being naked and wearing rough clothes.
That sounds contradictory.
It does, and scholars often suggest maybe those descriptions refer to practices from his past lives, which that text also talks about. For the final quest, the focus really narrows onto those three. Forcing the mind, forcing the breath, and starving the body.
Let's break those down. Forceful mind control, what did that look like?
It sounds like actively trying to dominate any unwholesome thought that popped up, really clamping down, using sheer willpower to suppress and kind of torment the mind into submission.
Wow. Sounds brutal.
Yeah. And the texts say it took a massive physical toll. But interestingly, they also keep highlighting his incredible ability to endure intense pain without being mentally overwhelmed by it.
That resilience again.
Exactly. It's a recurring theme during this whole ascetic period. He was pushing his limits hard.
And this forceful control, it connects to another teaching, the Vitakkasamdhana Sutta, but it's different there, right?
Precisely. In that sutta, forcefully suppressing thoughts is presented as a last resort, something you only do if gentler methods like replacing the thought, ignoring it, examining its roots haven't worked.
So why did he try it so intensely before?
Well, the thinking is perhaps his experience with the deep meditations, realizing even they didn't fully root out these deep habits. Maybe that led him to think, okay, I need more direct attack, force these things out.
An experiment, really, trying everything.
It seems so. Realizing profound concentration alone wasn't the final answer for removing these ingrained patterns. Okay, then there was the breath control.
What did that involve? Not like mindfulness of breathing, I assume.
Oh, definitely not. The Mahasakaka Sutta describes incredibly intense practices, holding the breath, stopping it, causing extreme physical sensations.
Oh, it's just dream.
The similes are pretty graphic, like having your skull pierced with a sword, or the pressure of a blacksmith's bellows, or a tight leather strap crushing your head, or even like a butcher carving you open.
Goodness. That sounds agonizing.
Yeah.
Purely about forcing the breath.
Yes, just sheer effort and enduring the pain. Again, the texts emphasize his incredible determination.
Incredible resolve.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting to speculate. Maybe this intense focus on the sensation of breathing, even in this harsh way, perhaps it planted a seed. Maybe it contributed later to his deep understanding of mindful breathing.
A different kind of attention.
Totally different. The later practice is all about calm, gentle awareness of the natural breath, not forcing it, and that leads to insight, liberation. There are 16 steps outlined for that practice.
Moving from force to awareness. And how does that mindful awareness of breath connect to the mind itself?
Well, as you stay with the breath, gently, persistently, your attention can naturally start to notice the mind behind the breath, the quality of awareness itself. This can bring up feelings of ease, even joy, which helps concentration deepen further, leading to a sense of freedom from the usual mental chatter. And because the breath is always changing, always coming and going.
Minutes.
Exactly. It becomes a perfect object for contemplating impermanence in everything. And that contemplation leads to letting go, dispassion, cessation.
So a huge shift in how he worked with breath.
Yeah.
Okay, the third big ascetic practice, fasting. He considered stopping food entirely.
Yes, initially. And there's this interesting detail in some accounts where devas, celestial beings, offer to basically feed him magically through his skin.
Seriously?
Yeah, reflects some ancient beliefs about spiritual beings. But he refused, said it would be deceptive. Instead, he decided just to eat minuscule amounts, like a tiny bit of bean soup, that sort of thing.
And the physical results were devastating, right? The descriptions are famous.
Extremely vivid. Limbs like withered reeds, spine like a string of beads, ribs sticking out, eyes sunken deep, just total emaciation.
Wow.
But again, there's a contrast. Later Buddhist teachings actually connect a mindful, insightful relationship with food, understanding why we eat, developing healthy habits to real spiritual progress, even up to the level of non-returner.
So it's not about not eating, but about how you relate to food.
Exactly. His extreme fasting might have been aimed at weakening desire, but it mainly just weakened his body. The key, the texts suggest, isn't just abstinence, but penetrative understanding of food's role.
Understanding versus just denying.
Right. There's even a lovely verse about the joy of deep concentration being a kind of food. The real nourishment is internal.
And later, when he set rules for monks, like 1 meal a day.
His emphasis was that that single meal should leave you feeling strong and, well, not weak, a total contrast to his own earlier fasting experience. The bottom line seems to be, don't let dietary discipline actually weaken you so much it hinders your practice.
That makes sense. And tied into this, the texts mention his understanding of feelings, how some pleasant feelings can actually increase negativity, while others help cultivate the positive.
Yes. He learned to discern which feelings were skillful to cultivate and which were better to let go of, based on their results. His whole ascetic period was probably driven, in part, by that common ancient belief, to reach happiness through self-inflicted pain.
A belief he ultimately rejected.
Completely. When it failed to bring liberation, he realized that path was a dead end. Which brings us right to that crucial turning point.
The big recollection. Remembering that experience of the first jhana, the first deep absorption from way back when he first left home, how important was that memory?
It was everything. Absolutely pivotal. He remembered sitting under that tree, naturally entering the state of deep calm and focus, secluded from desires, free from unwholesome thoughts, just experiencing this profound joy and happiness born of that seclusion and concentration.
And in remembering it,
In that moment of recall, he knew. He recognized that state, that path, as the right path for awakening as it really is. It was the aha moment, the insight that extreme self-torture wasn't the way. A rediscovery of balance.
it's like finding a forgotten map. And even after he was fully awakened, he still got challenged on this, right? Like Mara questioning him giving up asceticism.
Yes. Mara basically accused him of taking the easy way out, compromising his purity by abandoning the harsh practices.
And his response,
Firm. He said essentially, I cultivated the right aspiration. I'm now fully liberated from those useless practices. I've attained unsurpassed awakening. He knew a better way.
and he even used this idea when talking to the Jains, the Nigesas, comparing worldly happiness to the bliss of absorption.
Exactly. He asked them whose happiness is greater, King Bimbisara with all his royal power or someone experiencing deep meditative bliss.
And they agreed that Buddha's was superior.
They did. It really underscores the profound nature of that inner joy found in concentration. And this ability to sit absorbed for long periods. that relates to his determination later, sitting under the Bodhi tree.
But it was a different kind of determination by then, wasn't it? Not the gritting your teeth endurance of asceticism?
Completely different. He'd seen the futility of forcing the mind and body like that. His resolve now came from clarity, from knowing the right path, and from that unwavering motivation he'd had all along, liberation from suffering.
That core goal never changed.
Never. It's what led him to abandon the high meditations and the extreme asceticism. Each apparent failure just seemed to sharpen his focus, strengthen his resolve.
It's a powerful lesson for us, isn't it? Keeping our own motivation clear.
Absolutely. Regularly bringing the goal to mind creates a powerful momentum and inclination of the mind.
So what was his state like just before the final awakening?
The texts describe him as having tireless energy, a calm body, very stable mindfulness, and a mind that was deeply concentrated, unified.
Peaceful but alert.
Yes. And interestingly, there's still that continuity with the ascetic phase. He wasn't overwhelmed by feelings. But now, instead of pain, it was the intense pleasure of absorption that he met with equanimity.
Able to handle bliss without getting lost in it.
Right. And there's also mention of a more subtle pleasure, just the feeling of being fully present in the moment. That itself can be an anchor, helping to counter negativity.
So with this clear path rediscovered, this balanced determination, the stage was set. Awakening involved the 3 higher knowledges. The first was remembering past lives.
Yes. And the text suggests this wasn't like a random magic trick. It was a natural result of his incredibly refined mindfulness and concentration. He could recall his present life in detail, and that ability just extended further back.
How far back?
Countless lifetimes, apparently. Remembering names, families, what he ate, pleasure, pain, and crucially, understanding the causes and conditions why those lives unfolded as they did. Seeing the whole cycle.
Gaining this vast perspective on rebirth. And the mindfulness behind this. It links to his later teaching of the 4 Satipatthanas, the 4 foundations of mindfulness.
Definitely. You can see the seeds everywhere in his own journey. Mindfulness of the body. Think of him observing fear in the forest or enduring ascetic pain. Mindfulness of feelings. His equanimity with both pain and bliss. Mindfulness of mind. Sorting wholesome and unwholesome thoughts. Mindfulness of dharmas or mental objects. Recognizing and overcoming those subtle hindrances to concentration. His own path informed the teaching.
And these 4 body, feelings, mind, phenomena, they became a cornerstone of his teaching.
Absolutely central. The texts say cultivating them consistently brings you closer to the core of the Dharma, the path, the deathless state, nirvana, freedom from suffering.
Freedom from birth, old age, sickness, death, worry. All of it.
Yes, and some texts add you need to practice diligently, with clear comprehension, free from craving and aversion towards the world. It's a complete path, starting with simple body awareness and leading all the way to liberation.
Okay, that's the first higher knowledge. The second was seeing the karma of others, how beings pass away and are reborn.
Yes. Seeing how their actions, their karma, shape their future lives. It's fascinating. There's a parallel between the internal focus of Satipatthana, watching your own mind and body, and this external focus, seeing the bigger karmic picture for all beings.
Seeing the universal law of cause and effect. And the third, the final knowledge.
The ending of the influxes, the aspas. This is full awakening.
What are these influxes exactly?
They're the deep-seated mental pollutants or paints. Sensual desire, the craving for existence or becoming, and fundamental ignorance. They are what keep us bound to the cycle of rebirth, says Sara.
And ending them came
From his profound realization of the 4 Noble Truths. That understanding cut through the ignorance, which is the root cause of the influxes. Awakening also involved deeply investigating the 5 aggregates of clinging.
Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness.
Right. The components we usually identify as me or mine, he understood their appeal, their drawbacks, and the escape from clinging to them, realizing they're impermanent, not ultimately controllable.
And this ties into dependent arising.
Deeply. Seeing how ignorance conditions our actions, which condition consciousness, which conditions our whole psychophysical experience, understanding that chain and how to break it is key. Some suggest if he'd grasped dependent arising earlier, maybe the asceticism wouldn't have seemed necessary. It's interesting, too, how dependent arising has echoes of older Vedic creation ideas, while the 4 truths resemble a medical framework diagnosis, cause, cure, treatment.
And after awakening, he continued to enjoy solitude.
Yes, but now the joy came from the utter peace of having eradicated those influxes, and also knowing the immense benefit this discovery would bring to others. The Sabbasava Sutta actually lists 7 practical methods for removing these influxes. Seeing the Four Truths, restraining the senses, using things like food and robes wisely, enduring hardship, avoiding danger, removing unwholesome thoughts, and cultivating the 7 factors of awakening.
Ah, the awakening factors.
Yes. Things like mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. Cultivating these based on seclusion and aiming for cessation leads directly to liberation. It's a path from mindfulness right through to nirvana.
And soon after awakening, he knew his old teacher Ara Kalama had died, showing his independence now.
Exactly. And the texts make a clear distinction. A Buddha, a Tathagata, discovers and proclaims the path when it's been forgotten. Arahants become liberated by following that discovered path.
And the path he taught included
The 4 satadhanas, 4 right efforts, 4 bases for psychic power, the 5 faculties, 5 powers, 7 awakening factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. The whole package.
Okay, so fully awakened, his first teaching act was to find those 5 companions he'd practiced asceticism with. And he started by talking about 2 extremes.
Yes, he went right to the heart of their shared experience. He addressed the extreme of harsh self-mortification they'd all pursued, and its opposite, just indulging in sensual pleasures.
And they were skeptical at first.
Very. They'd seen him give up the practices they thought were essential. They thought he'd basically given up, gone back to comfort.
And even before he got to them, he met someone else, Upaka, who wasn't convinced.
Right. Upaka seemed impressed initially, but when the Buddha claimed total victory, supreme awakening, Upaka just sort of walked away. It shows the challenge.
Yeah.
How do you actually communicate such a profound realization effectively?
Yeah. So the 5 monks, they'd even decided to just ignore him when he arrived.
They had made a pact not to show him respect. But his whole presence must have been different. And his point wasn't that he'd gone back to sensual indulgence. It was that he'd found a middle way.
But between the extremes.
Exactly. One text in the Ikotarika Āgama suggests this teaching on the 2 extremes was the entirety of the very first talk.
Really? Just that?
According to that version, yes. Other accounts suggest maybe there was a pause after explaining the extremes, giving them time to think before he introduced the 4 Noble Truths.
A mindful approach to teaching.
It seems so, but that teaching on the middle way was crucial. It addressed their main doubt. Abandoning asceticism didn't mean abandoning the path. It meant finding a better path.
And the middle way isn't just about pleasure and pain, is it? It applies more broadly.
Oh, much broader. Like avoiding the extreme views of eternalism, things last forever, and nihilism, nothing matters. Contemplating dependent arising, how things arise and cease based on conditions, helps you let go of fixed ideas about a permanent self. And suffering ceases without falling into wrong views.
And the Madhyama Āgama has that beautiful description of the path unfolding from suffering all the way to nirvana.
Yes, starting with experiencing dukkha, leading to confidence, right attention, mindfulness, comprehension, guarding the senses, morality, absence of regret, joy, tranquility, happiness, concentration, seeing things as they are, disenchantment, dispassion, liberation, nirvana, step by step.
A complete roadmap. So, after tackling the extremes, he introduced the 4 Noble Truths. Why that framework?
Well, it was probably a very effective way to communicate his core insights to people who came from that intense, disciplined background. It uses a structure they might relate to, almost like a medical diagnosis.
Diagnosis, cause, prognosis, treatment.
Exactly. Dukkha, suffering, is the illness. Its arising, craving, ignorance is the cause. Its cessation is the possibility of cure. And the path, the Eightfold Path, is the medicine. And calling them noble truths implies these are realities to be realized for oneself.
A way to convey profound ideas in a relatable way.
Yes, giving them something familiar, but also fundamentally new, inspiring confidence.
And each truth has tasks associated with it. Understanding suffering, abandoning the cause.
Realizing cessation and cultivating the path.
Right. And these aren't necessarily 4 separate steps you take one after the other. They're more like facets of one deep, penetrating insight rooted in the direct experience of nirvana.
An insight linked to understanding those 5 aggregates. Yes, his claim to awakening was based on fully understanding them. And it connects to his 10 powers as a Buddha, extraordinary capacities of insight, culminating in those 3 higher knowledges.
And the turning of the wheel of Dharma, the teaching starting, it wasn't just him speaking. Someone had to get it.
Precisely. The Dharma wheel truly turns when the teaching leads to someone else's insight. And that happened right there, in the first discourse.
Kutanya.
Kutanya, one of the five, attained stream entry, the first stage of awakening. He saw it. The texts give his realization in verse. Seeing the Four Noble Truths with wisdom is the safest refuge, leading out of all suffering.
Wow. The first fruit of the teaching.
Yeah. And it's a reminder for us too, to consciously incline the mind towards nirvana. Reflect on that description. This is peaceful, this is sublime, the calming of all constructions, the letting go, cessation, nirvana.
A powerful focus point. And ultimately, a Tathagata, a Buddha, is defined by awakening to these four truths. Now, moving beyond the core teachings, his character comes through too, like his equanimity.
Huge aspect. When he asked for respect, it wasn't ego. It was practical. Listen, I have something vital to teach. Pay attention so you can benefit.
Because the real refuge is the Dharma, not him personally.
Exactly. He famously told his monks before he died, essentially, don't rely on me. Be your own island, your own refuge. Take refuge in the Dharma. How? By practicing the four satipatthanas, be self-reliant.
And he lived this, didn't he? Even when people were angry or critical.
Oh, absolutely. The Mahasakaka Sutta, again, faced with harsh criticism, he just remained completely calm. No defensiveness, no wounded ego. He just wasn't ruffled.
Pleasing.
Same when monks were being noisy and agitated. Instead of getting angry, he used a simile about inner peace being more important than outer show. He consistently taught the four immeasurables, right? Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and this very equanimity.
And mindfulness is key to this, spotting the reactivity before it takes over.
Yes. Being present lets you see the anger or irritation arising, and then remembering the Buddha's own freedom from these things can inspire you to let them go too.
Like refusing to accept someone else's gift of anger.
Exactly. You don't have to take it on board. Stay mindful. Stay equanimous. And the Buddha constantly used whatever was happening, good, bad, neutral, as a teaching opportunity. That inspires us too. See the lesson in everything with mindfulness and balance.
Okay. The texts also talk about him going beyond views. Like with Malukyaputa's big metaphysical questions he wouldn't answer.
Right, because they weren't practical. They didn't lead to liberation. Why waste time speculating endlessly when the house is on fire, essentially? His focus was on ending suffering.
And related to this, the tetralemma comes up, that four-possibility logic.
Yeah, it was an ancient Indian tool. Instead of just yes or no, is or is not, it allows for both, neither, or other combinations. It helps break down rigid binary thinking.
Useful for complex issues.
Very. Helps foster understanding, reduces conflict that comes from clinging dogmatically to one viewpoint.
And this leads towards the idea of emptiness, sunyata. He often dwelled in emptiness.
Yes, the Kusunyanatta Sutta talks about this. It's a practice of progressively letting go of perceptions of solid things, seeing the absence, ultimately leading to the mind's liberation from those deep influxes.
Seeing things without distortion.
Exactly. Seeing what's not there as empty of inherent existence and seeing what is present, the immediate experience, just as it is. And crucially, this deep seeing of emptiness doesn't lead to indifference. It actually fuels compassion.
How so?
Because you see the suffering that comes from clinging to illusions, and you want to help others see through them too.
And the texts use examples like the two oxen, senses and sense objects.
Right. The Indriyabhavana Sutta says the problem isn't the senses or the things we sense. They're not the fetter. The fetter is the desire and lust that arise in relation to them.
So don't just block the senses. Cultivate wisdom regarding them.
Exactly. Train the faculties. The Mullapariyaya Sutta contrasts how ordinary people constantly build up stories and self-references around experience versus someone liberated who doesn't engage in that mental proliferation.
Just experience what's there, without adding all the extra stuff.
That's the instruction. Limit it to what's actually seen, heard, sensed. Without the commentary, the judgment, the craving, the aversion. That's how you unyoke the oxen. Drop into the present with receptive awareness, not reactivity. And that itself can bring a subtle joy, a taste of emptiness.
Okay. Shifting a bit to his daily life, the texts even mention small details, like how he wore his robes.
Yeah, a Brahmin student noted it. Worn neatly, practically, not too high or low, not too tight, but still protected from wind. Orderly.
And walking was a regular practice.
Clearly a common meditation posture for him, and his routine after meals is described. Put things away mindfully, wash up, then go to his hut for formal setting meditation.
So he kept up formal practice throughout his life.
It seems so. Consistent dedication.
There's also that story about Mara bugging him for sleeping during the day.
Right. But the Buddha's reply basically said, I'm free from craving, abiding in nirvana's bliss, so sleep isn't an issue for me. It wasn't about encouraging laziness, but showing that for an awakened being, even sleep is just sleep, no defilements attached.
And he told Anathapindika something similar, about sleeping well.
Yeah, that a true Brahmin, someone who's attained nirvana, always sleeps peacefully because the root poisons greed, hatred, delusion are gone. Even in tough conditions, the mind is at ease.
Inner peace translates to good rest. Now, towards the very end, he got seriously ill.
Yes, a very severe illness, near death, but he consciously chose to endure the pain with mindfulness, rather than escape into a state of cessation. He wanted to remain present.
Wow. And then his final decision to let go of his life force.
At the Kapala shrine, yes, a deliberate relinquishing accompanied by, according to the texts, a great earthquake and light, a momentous event.
And how did he react when his chief disciples, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, died before him?
With profound acknowledgement of the loss, but without personal grief or despair. He used it as a teaching moment, reminding everyone that everything conditioned, everything born, is impermanent. Even the greatest disciples pass away.
The lesson in letting go.
Exactly. And connecting that awareness of impermanence, our own fragile existence, to the breath in meditation. That's powerful. Inhale, energy. Exhale, letting go. Mindfulness of death itself is presented as a path to the deathless, to nirvana.
And his very final moments involve meditation.
Yes, Sanskrit texts describe him moving systematically through all the jhanas, the formless spheres, right up to the cessation of feeling and perception, and then back down again before finally passing away. A completely mindful and controlled transition.
Incredible. And his foster mother, Mahapajapati Gautami, had a similar passing.
Yes, also involving deep meditative states, and some accounts even suggest her attainment might have seemed even more elaborate in that final sequence. And the texts list many other outstanding nuns too. Khema, Upalavancha, Pakara, Kisagatami, highlighting their specific strengths and achievements, showing clearly that women had the same potential for full awakening.
So we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. His human beginnings, the ethical base, overcoming obstacles, that key recollection, the middle path, the four truths, equanimity, emptiness, his daily life, his final days. Wow. One thing that seems essential to even start this path is confidence, right? Faith in his awakening.
Absolutely crucial. You see it with disciples like Mahanama relying on the Buddha's qualities, especially when he wasn't physically present. Using the 6 recollections, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, morality, generosity, devas. Confidence, or satar, is listed as a key spiritual faculty.
What is it exactly?
It's described as serene confidence, a settled trust in the Tathagata's awakening. It's not blind faith, but an initial trust that motivates you to actually engage with the teachings.
And then your own experience confirms it.
Exactly. You start with trust, you practice, you begin to see the results for yourself, and that strengthens the confidence. It becomes experiential. And even today, without a living Buddha right here, cultivating that confidence in the possibility of awakening, in the wisdom of the path, using those recollections, it's a really powerful practice in itself.
Recalling his qualities arahant, fully enlightened, perfect in knowledge and conduct, that itself helps the mind.
Definitely. It brings up joy, happiness, tranquility. That calms the mind, helps overcome hindrances indirectly, and deepens concentration. It can even feel protective in difficult times.
So a practical takeaway for listeners could be, try to bring his example to mind.
Yeah, make the Buddha a presence. In different situations, maybe ask, what would the Buddha's approach be here? Reflect on his actions, his recommendations we've discussed.
And we've touched on so many practices that echo his journey.
Right. Clarifying motivation, cultivating compassion, and the other Brahma Viharas, mindfulness of breathing, the 4 Satipatthanas, developing the awakening factors, practicing letting go, consciously inclining the mind towards nirvana. It's all there.
So the final thought to leave everyone with, maybe it's this. Given this incredible journey, this profound wisdom, what potential lies dormant in each of us? What capacity do we have to cultivate these same awakened qualities through our own dedicated practice, guided by his timeless example?
That's the enduring question, isn't it?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Buddha's life and path.
My pleasure.
We really hope this journey through the sources has given you, well, a valuable shortcut to feeling well-informed, and maybe spark some inspiration to explore further the texts, the practices themselves.
Yeah, hopefully it's a starting point.
And maybe, just for today, try asking that question in a tricky situation. What would the Buddha do? See what comes up. What new questions has this raised for you? What feels most relevant to your own path?
Keep exploring.
Absolutely. The journey of understanding, of awakening, it's ongoing. But the insights from the Buddha's own life story, they offer an amazing, enduring guide. Thanks for listening.